Please listen carefully.
Welcome back to another episode of the Extra Buttery Podcast. We've got a giant-sized lineup for you on the episode today, kicking off with a wrap-up of everything that came out of Comic-Con, including our favorite news items, trailers. We're going to talk about Stranger Things, Justice League, Ready Player One, Pacific Rim Uprising. It's all in there. Then we'll move on to some discussion of Bond 25, which is starting to ramp up. It's got a release date set and some frontrunners for the director's chair, so we'll talk about that. Then a quick little bit about the TIFF lineup. The first couple of programs have been announced for the festival, which kicks off in about 6 weeks' time. So I'll be diving into some of my favorite items that were announced. Then we'll close things out with some discussion of some recent releases, including Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk, War for the Planet of the Apes, and Valerian in the City of a Thousand Planets. But coming to you from Toronto, my name is Robert Snow, and joining me from Vancouver is my co-host Jason Chen. How's it going?
Fine, thanks. How are you?
All right, yeah. You didn't change it up that time. We're gonna.
Yeah, I did. I said fine instead of good. So I did change it up.
Okay, all right. We will continue this. This will be one of the ongoing jokes.
I was just saying that to keep you on your toes.
But yeah, let's look at Comic-Con to kick things off. And I think maybe the best way to open up the discussion would just be, what would be your favorite thing that came out of it? Favorite trailer, favorite bit of news, anything?
I don't have a particular favorite because I'm just wary of all the hype that comes out of Comic-Con.
Sure.
But there are certainly two things that I'm really intrigued by, and they're both on Netflix. So the first is Defenders. After the debacle that was Iron Fist, I'm kind of curious about how they're going to bring everything back, including Daredevil, Luke Cage, and Jessica Jones. From the early buzz, what I've heard is that the series is kind of like any of the other 4 individual series, and that it starts pretty slow, but it gets ramped up.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But I'm interested to see how it comes together, because I think, as well as Netflix started off, I really think they need to make a big hit with this one. I think if this one kind of falls flat on its face like Iron Fist did, the confidence in Netflix's original productions kind of erodes for me.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And I think of the 2 trailers we've seen so far, I kind of preferred the first one to the second one. A lot of it is going to come down, for me at least, on Sigourney Weaver's character. Is she the kind of menacing force? Is she a good villain in the classic sense? Sort of up there with Wilson Fisk from Daredevil. Is she that level of? Is she well written, basically? When you're combining all of these character threads together, we're not going to be able to spend quite as much time in each of the characters' heads. And we know that Danny Rand from Iron Fist, he's kind of a lost cause at this point. I really don't care about that guy.
Yeah,
so
me neither.
Yeah, there's an element of risk there for sure.
Yeah, and I don't know what kind of. Granted, all 4 shows are kind of dark, but I wonder what kind of tone they're going for, because with that dark tone and the amount of episodes they have per season, it kind of gets tiring. I find it's a hard show to binge watch sometimes.
Yeah.
Because it kind of just lulls you into a state of boredom.
Yeah. Or if sometimes they do weird things structurally where they'll build up an arc for half a season, and then they'll totally change villains. That was a problem in Luke Cage.
And the other thing I'm interested in is Stranger Things too.
Yeah, that's a big one for me too.
So we know that there's gonna be 2 new major cast members, but it's still gonna focus on the 4 kids. And what was the name of the character, the officer?
That's David Harbour's character, Hap.
Yes. So from the trailers, it looks like it's going to be not coincidentally, it's going to be released around Halloween, but it looks like it's going to be a pretty scary show.
Nothing's going to go back to the way that it was. Not really.
I saw something.
What is it?
I don't know.
I felt it everywhere.
Darkness falls
across the land. The midnight hour is close at hand. Creatures crawl in search of blood to terrorize y'all's neighborhood.
The return of the Upside Down world, the return of 13, that's already public knowledge.
11?
11, sorry, yeah, not 13. I don't know why I said 13. It looks interesting. I really wonder what direction it'll go in, because I always felt that Stranger Things as a TV show was perfect as a one-off. And the problem you kind of don't want to run into is to stretch out a TV series when there's no good reason to do it other than to make money.
Yeah, exactly. Like it was like the first season of Stranger Things hit this perfect combo of, blending together all of its influences and then wrapping things up in a narratively satisfying way. Like it's surprisingly difficult to deliver an episode to TV that can like build its own world and also tie things off in the way that Stranger Things did. So yeah, this season 2 is going to be a major litmus test for how much longer this retro cool kind of thing can keep itself going.
And we don't know how 11's going to come back either, right?
Yeah, but we know, I mean, she most likely will in some way, but yeah.
Well, she's in the trailer, so
Yeah.
she does come back.
Yeah, definitely.
What about you? Was there anything from Comic-Con you were excited about?
Oh, yeah. For me, it was Ready Player One, and I think that would be Steven Spielberg's adaptation of the Ernest Cline novel from 2011.
Have you ever read that novel?
I did, yeah. Actually, I in anticipation of the movie coming out, I picked it up at the bookstore, and I read through it there maybe about a month or two ago. Mm-hmm. And I really enjoyed it. Like,
oh, really?
There are plenty of references for people who were kids in the 70s and 80s. There were a lot more references in there for that generation than there might be for, say, our generation. But the kind of sense of fun and the recombining approach that Ernest Cline takes with all of these different series and franchises, and how he kind of mixes and matches them and kind of creates this celebration of geek culture was really fun. And then it looks like from the trailer that Spielberg showed at Comic-Con, they've done a pretty good job capturing that kind of recombining nature of the book. But here's a quick taste of what Spielberg brought to Comic-Con.
They called our generation the missing millions. Missing not because we went anywhere. There's nowhere left to go. Nowhere except the oasis. The only place that feels like I mean anything. A world where the limits of reality are your own imagination.
You get a sense that the world that the story is set in is still very dark. There's definitely some grim aspects of the book that set it in contrast to the kind of happy-go-lucky pop culture stuff. But it looks like Spielberg's kind of got his finger on that, so that's kind of encouraging. As for like the trailer itself, I found a little bit of a weird thing where there was a bit of a break midway through the trailer, and they kind of jumped into this car chase sequence that wasn't from the original book, which you can expect that in a film that's got to be 2 hours long. There's going to be some additions and some deletions, but it was a little bit weird to kind of suddenly see such an obvious departure from the story. I'm not sure how that fits in, but yeah, we'll see. The movie comes out in, I think, March 2018. So yeah, there's a lot to look forward to there.
I have 3 things on Ready Player One that I kind of want to touch on.
Oh yeah, okay.
So the first is, it's really funny to me that this book is taking off in this day and age, and it doesn't surprise me because we kind of are in the geek age.
Yeah.
Where, superheroes and comic books and all sorts of pop culture are in the moment. They're really popular right now. So it doesn't shock me that Ready Player One has the type of following it does. My 2 things though is that I didn't read the book, but I have read excerpts of the book, and I can't help but feel that the prose is awful.
Yeah.
It's not a book that I think is particularly well written, and that may be just because I haven't read the whole thing. But in my personal opinion, it's not a book that I would enjoy reading.
You're looking for a little bit more like artistry, or
I just don't think his prose is particularly intelligent or has a particularly good flow. I mean, mind you, it's going to be developed into a movie, so it's not going to be word for word verbatim, and it's not going to be the same.
True, yeah, and I would agree with you to a point. I mean, I think first of all, I think Ernest Cline was a bit of a new writer when Ready Player One got published. If it wasn't his first novel, it was definitely, one of the first. So I think maybe he's worked on his style a little bit since then. But yeah, there's a kind of like a workmanlike, or his thing is more about setting up the world than it is about giving you some sort of stylish or never before seen insight into the characters.
Right. It kind of feels like someone just kind of hammered away at their keyboard, throwing in as many 80s references as they can. Which I don't think is like, does it justice, but that's what it kind of reads like.
Yeah, I mean, I would try reading it from like picking it up and maybe reading the first couple of chapters so that you get a sense of like where the chunks that you read fit in, because there is he does spend quite a bit of time establishing kind of the darker implications of the story in the early chapters that kind of give you a sense of like, okay, the real world from this story is pretty shitty, and therefore all of the 80s and pop culture references are the one bright light that kind of lifts things out. So when you get those two components together, it makes a little bit more sense. But yeah, it's for me, the way it was written wasn't the attraction. It was more kind of getting the references and the commentary on, is our world, like our real world, going too far in the direction of what's seen in Ready Player One? Like, did
you just swear, Rob? Was that the first time on this podcast I've heard you swear?
Absolutely not. I've definitely sworn before.
Really? I was gonna say.
I know you're the more foul-mouthed of us two, but
well, don't hold it against me. I just have strong feelings about certain things sometimes.
Yes, but I think in this case it's warranted, because Cline does, in the way he kind of sketches out, like the world of Ready Player One outside of the oasis where everyone spends all of their time. The people live in these towers built out of disused RV trailers, and there's no actual school system left anymore. All the kids in their school get all their schooling from the Oasis game system. Pretty much everyone works within the Oasis. Like the landscape is this blighted, nothing can grow. Everyone just spends all their time indoors. Like it's a pretty terrible place.
Right. The last thing I kind of want to touch on about Ready Player One, and this is just like a huge personal thing, is that Steven Spielberg's movies aimed at young adults and kids just never resonated with me.
Oh, right. So this is kind of like with the BFG, like it was just...
Yeah, and I love the BFG. I love Roald Dahl. Even going as far back as, say, like Close Encounters of the Third Kind or E.T., like those movies never connected with me as a kid. And I'm not the biggest Steven Spielberg fan to begin with. So my sort of interest in this project is pretty lukewarm. I do have doubts about how well it'll do at the box office. Granted, it's pretty early. I feel like even something that like A Wrinkle in Time, the new movie from Ava DuVernay, might even do better. It does seem like it's been a while since Spielberg had a really big hit.
Yeah, like the Bridge of Spies did reasonably well, that was but it felt...
Yeah, but that was a film for adults.
It was a film for adults, yeah. And then BFG, I don't think the BFG was a flop by any measure, but it was...
No,
it just...
But compared to his past stuff...
Yeah, it's not the one that people are like, hey, have you seen the BFG? Like, it definitely... It didn't get that word of mouth kind of vibe that you see from his bigger stuff.
Right.
But then, yeah, he's kind of going on a bit of a TikTok kind of pattern for his future films. So he's doing, Ready Player One is his next one. So that's more kid focused. But then he's following that up almost immediately, like I think even a couple of months later, with a movie about the Pentagon Papers. Right. Which has got like an all-star cast with all sorts of people who have worked with Spielberg many times in the past.
Yeah, so he'll always have the ability to attract top talent. It's just the quality of his work hasn't been as solid as I think it's been in years past.
Yeah, like this is we haven't seen something like Jaws or like Raiders of the Lost Ark, or there hasn't been something that culturally important.
I'm trying to think back, and the most recent one I can think of is maybe Saving Private Ryan, and that was in 99.
Yeah, it's not like he's had like a major box office and critical smash, cultural icon, classic in the making kind of thing, and maybe in the past 10 years, that I'll grant you, but I still think he's one of the like the most important working directors.
Yeah, he's definitely one of the most decorated and most accomplished. But it's nothing like from the 80s or the 80s where he had Raiders of the Lost Ark, E.T., Indiana Jones, Color Purple, Empire of the Sun, and then kind of capped it off Jurassic Park and Schindler's List in the early 90s. So he hasn't had that run in a while. But maybe he might go through like kind of a career resurgence like Ridley Scott did with The Martian. Going back to Comic-Con though, as Comic-Con's like known for its superhero stuff, we have a release year for Wonder Woman 2, which will be 2019.
Yeah, that's to be expected. I didn't get too fired up about that one, but yeah, it's, Have
you watched the movie again since?
Since I watched it in theaters, no. Have you seen it twice?
No, I've only seen it once, but after I watch films, I kind of like tend to meditate and like
sure, yeah,
sleep on it for a little bit. And I keep going back to the fact that, like it's a good film, but it's not great. And I don't understand why everyone likes it so much.
Well, I think there's sort of two things going on here. And I think we have to tread very carefully here because...
Well, let's leave aside the political stuff.
Exactly. And that's one of the important components for me is that I think a lot of what is fueling the kind of huge surge of appreciation for Wonder Woman is where it is in the cultural moment that it's kind of created for itself, where it is one of the first major studio films led by a woman, a blockbuster superhero film led by a woman, directed by a woman. It's got all of that kind of, it's the first quality around it.
Would you describe it as a watershed film?
Yeah, I mean, right now, and at least in terms of the way people are talking about it, it's got that kind of cultural watershed. But in terms of like the way it's put together as a film, like if you took if we're talking like purely objectively, filmmaking quality.
Yeah, just looking at the film objectively.
Which is difficult because, everyone's going to bring their subjective ideas into an objective evaluation of something. But I mean, it's definitely well made. It works a lot better than a lot of its peers in the current cinematic universe from DC.
Well, DC doesn't set the bar very high, right? So
but it's, for me, it's still like on a filmmaking level, it's still a solid like 3 out of 4 or 3.5 out of 5. Like I legitimately I would watch it again. It's up there for me. But it's, I mean, I think when you combine that then with all of the cultural appreciation and that kind of the extra...
Yeah, it gets extra brownie points.
Yeah, the extra brownie points that it's getting, that's how it's kind of getting up there to the top films of the year kind of mentions, which, maybe that'll cool down a little bit once more stuff comes out in the latter half of the year and once more female-led superhero movies are released. So
I guess the bigger question is when a movie is reviewed and, a lot of box office success is linked to Rotten Tomatoes ratings these days. Do you think it's important to release a film at a proper time? Like, is there a sweet spot for a film to be released like Wonder Woman? Like, it's hard to see Wonder Woman do as well as it did 10 years ago, or at least start the same kind of conversations as it would have. And I wonder if because of the environment, we tend to overrate certain films because it reflects our society that much more.
I think there's definitely an effect there. You've got Wonder Woman coming out at a time when a lot of people are talking about the lack of female directors, the lack of female-led films.
Well, equality, yeah. Yeah,
and then there's, that's just purely within the industry. And then you look outside of movies and you look at like the political climate and stuff to do with, what's happening in the United States with their political situation, or more broadly, the things that are happening in the Middle East with women's rights. Like it's a huge conversation. So this kind of, it's hitting at a point, and like maybe if Wonder Woman had come out not necessarily 10 years in the past, but like look 10 years in the future when you would hope that a bunch more work has been done on the equality issue, would a movie like Wonder Woman coming out 10 years from now get the same kind of praise? Hard to say. Maybe not.
Right. That's true. And I think it bears mentioning that Wonder Woman is not the first movie to feature a strong female character.
No, definitely not. But it's kind of occupying that space that one of the last kind of male-dominated genres. So it's kind of
right.
It's kind of claiming that big everything that represents, in terms of cultural impact, money. Like, it's one of the last kind of sections that needed this balancing out.
Yeah, I would hesitate to call it an iconic film. I do think it's a bit of a watershed film or moment in film. I think, though, in maybe 5 to 10 years from now, we'll look at the movie differently. Just the fact that we may remember it as better than it actually is.
Yeah, there's a chance. Yeah.
The other thing I kind of want to touch on is Justice League. The big story is two things. The first is that apparently the reshoots have cost $25 million. So, I mean, DC is really sinking money into this. And part of it's because Joss Whedon has been hired to rejig some of the story or reshoot certain scenes.
Yeah.
But we've also seen the most recent trailer, and I can't help but think that this is just another Batman v Superman, another sucker punch type Zack Snyder venture where the action gets really boring, the palette is too dark, and the dialogue a little too stilted, and it kind of meanders in different directions without any real focus.
People were talking about, when the trailer dropped, there were a few people saying, oh, well, look, there's actually a few more flashes of color, or some of the lines sound funnier, or, but to your point earlier with Wonder Woman being kind of the best of a bad bunch, I think the bar is pretty low here for improvement. So just because they toss in, a little bit more color, like they fix the color grading a bit so that Aquaman looks a bit more orange or Wonder Woman looks a bit more red and blue or something out of this like super gray palette. I mean, those are not going to count for a lot in a 2.5 hour film.
Even compared to the first trailer that was released, tonally, it seems so much darker, like it's reverted to Zack Snyder's former self. You know what I mean?
And I think a lot of that comes from like their choice of villain. Like Steppenwolf is he's one of these
Earth Destroyer,
absurdly powerful, and I think it's pretty hard for people to really sympathize with villains like that.
Which is why Homecoming was so good, right?
Yeah, and these guys who come in with like fire sprouting out of their eyes, and they can fly, and they can like lift whole cities, and there's no real relatable quality to the villain that'll really make you be like, oh, I'm kind of actually creeped out by him. Like,
yeah, and the fact that Superman is gonna return is like the worst kept secret in the world. But I kind of wish they didn't have that final clip where clearly Alfred is confronting, or Superman is confronting Alfred. And Superman's probably going to be the plot deus ex machina where he like comes in and defeats Steppenwolf because he's like the most powerful person in the world. So like, I think DC has a problem of being too damn predictable. I think part of the reason why I liked Homecoming so much too, not to like keep going back to it, is that they retconned and they made twists on certain characters that are different from the comic book versions. And so Justice League feels a little too cookie cutter and a little too stale.
And well, one way they could improve on that, they could let Superman have his mustache. I had to get that in there funny. Because that was one of the silliest things to come out of the news cycle this week was how there's this issue with having to erase Henry Cavill's mustache with CGI in these Justice League reshoots because he's grown a mustache for Mission Impossible, which is shooting at the same time, and they can't have him shave that off for the reshoots in Justice League.
It can't be any worse than Kate Mara's blonde hair in Fantastic Four. Can't be.
But like, just imagine if Superman showed up and was like,
in a mustache
or like
that'd be really funny.
And people have already done it. The internet moves at light speed, so there's already clips from Batman v Superman. People have like, they've motion tracked a mustache onto Henry Cavill's upper lip and all of that, just for fun.
Yeah, it's like Superman gives his mustache a little twirl before he goes after Lex
Yeah,
Luthor.
or like wiggles it back and forth, like ding, 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 ding. Coming out of the Superman thing. For the last little bit of Comic-Con related stuff, we've got Pacific Rim Uprising, which dropped its first teaser trailer at Comic-Con this year.
And it sounds so stupid.
When the monsters came, we did not wait for heroes to fall from the sky and save us. We saved ourselves. Innovation is our superpower. What is a Jaeger? It's you, times 1,000. Tall as a mountain, with a beating heart that burns as bright as the sun.
In that clip, you hear the voice actress from the Portal video games, who does the voice of the sort of AI computer that runs the giant robots from the series. And the script of the teaser almost makes it sound like a tech commercial, like you're buying.
I know, it sounds like a video game.
Yeah,
what?
It's like the trailer is trying to sell you on the idea of buying a Jaeger for yourself, but that's ridiculous because they're the size of like a city block, and like nobody.
Well, if I could get one, I would.
Yeah,
get one,
anybody would, but like why take that kind of tone with the teaser? Because anybody who's lining up to watch Pacific Rim Uprising, probably 80-90% of them saw the first one. That's why they're coming back for the second one, so they would know what a Jaeger is. They don't need to be sold or told what a Jaeger is.
Yeah, and
so
where are my monsters? Jesus.
Yeah, like people, if you don't have a teaser ready with stuff from the actual movie, like actual footage, then don't mess around with something that seems really disconnected from the tone of Pacific Rim.
Yeah, it's just John Boyega in one of those like suits that they wear in a Jaeger, and some stupid tagline about how everyone needs a Jaeger or whatever. And it looks terrible. And I really think this film is going to suffer because Guillermo del Toro is not at the helm. The first one was a silly premise, but you knew what you were getting, and he delivered on every account.
Yeah, and that's exactly what he's great at. He can take concepts that in the hands of other directors would feel like trash or feel like B movies or, direct to streaming releases. And, he put so much craft and emotion into it that it elevates it to like A-list stuff. And I worry that even though they've, Del Toro has been actively involved in the production of this one. He's on as a producer, and I think it's Stephen DeKnight from Daredevil who's directing. But, Stephen DeKnight is not Del Toro, they're very different people. So
no, there's only one Del Toro.
Yeah, I'm really worried about this all of a sudden, and I kind of wish I wasn't, because I loved the original Pacific Rim so much.
I know, me too. This just really bugs me. It bums me out. I'm going to withhold judgment, but so far, it does not sound good.
Yeah, if they can deliver like a full trailer with actual footage from the film, that's going to be the real test for me. But we've kind of churned our way through a lot of the big Comic-Con stuff. So let's take a look at Bond 25, because there's a few little bits and pieces here. We've talked about Bond 25 in previous episodes, but it seems like things are finally starting to come together now. We've got a release date, and now we've got some director frontrunners. So, what did you make out of the announcements from the past couple of days?
So, the one name that obviously jumped out to me is Denis Villeneuve, which is kind of surprising because it doesn't feel like an action spy film is his type of movie. Granted, he did do Sicario, but Bond is like a big budget action set piece film. And Villeneuve, I think, has always been very good with containing his characters and containing the action in a very close setting. It makes you feel kind of claustrophobic. So he's the one name that jumped out at me, but he could do well, because I thought the same thing when Sam Mendes was attached to the Bond project, and I thought he did, a pretty good job. There are a couple films where I didn't like it as much as most people did, but you had thoughts on one of the other directors in the running.
Yeah, because just based on what Denis Villeneuve has kind of suggested in interviews, it sounds like he's going to be busy with the Dune remake. Bond 25 won't fit in with his production schedule, I don't think. So the name that I saw there that I was like, oh, okay, that that kind of makes sense, is Yann Demarge. And he's a French director who a lot of people probably won't recognize his name, but he did a movie, I think it was 2 years ago, called 71. And it was about a British soldier who gets stuck behind enemy lines in Ireland during the Troubles. And it's kind of like a historical war movie, but on a very personal, like one-man scale. And there's, it's just really well put together. It did really well with critics, but it didn't find an audience very well. I think I watched it on Netflix a few months ago. And, I just based on what I saw there, he seems like he would do a perfectly fine job if he is chosen for Bond 25.
Do you think this is a conscious decision by the studio to make sure that in this Bond film they don't, make the scale too big, which is what I thought the problem was in the previous films, and that you had a villain who was intent on destroying the world or destroying a country or something like that. Like, I wish we went back to the days where Bond was just chasing down a singular guy for a single mission.
It's hard to say because, I think one person who was writing about this frontrunner list, they put it really well. They said that the Bond franchise has always been more producer driven than director driven.
Yeah, that makes sense.
A lot of the creative decisions have always come from the Broccoli family, from Eon Productions. There's a through line there. And for me, I'm thinking maybe they're picking Yann Demarge because he's a director who they can not manipulate, but they can kind of work more cohesively with, I guess, to be diplomatic about it. Like they're not bringing in a guy who has a really well-established style.
But they didn't have any problems with Sam Mendes.
No, but I think Sam Mendes was a bigger name at the time that he was chosen. People knew him from his, Academy-winning movies in the past, whereas Yann Demarge, he's been in the business since the 90s. He's been directing features, but it wasn't until this movie 71 that people were like, oh yeah, like here's a new up and coming kind of guy, even though he wasn't really up and coming at all.
I actually think though, like having a big name director helps generate even more hype. Not that it needs it to, because it's Bond's 25th film, but I mean, I don't see any drawback in really having a seasoned director with a lot of experience or a lot of accolades to his name.
Oh no, there's no drawback, but maybe it's just that the Broccolis want somebody who who won't try to impose his style, because we know that like Denis Villeneuve is famous for trying to get as much creative control as he can on his films, but not to say that he can't work in a studio environment, because by all accounts Blade Runner 2049, that's very much a producer-driven film, and, he would have been faced with a lot of working with the studio to kind of make that thing happen.
Is the Bond 25 film going to continue the Christoph Waltz Spectre storyline?
I mean, I kind of hope it doesn't.
But they kind of have to, don't they?
I guess that, the ending of Spectre suggests that it could happen, but I don't know. I mean, I think the ending of Spectre would also work by itself. Like they could not return to the Christoph Waltz arc, and I would be fine with it. Pick a different villain to kind of close out Daniel Craig's tenure.
Like they kind of said Casino Royale was like, oh, let's explore Bond's roots and early on in his mission. And then they kind of progress from that, and they kind of go full circle, and then they introduce Blofeld. So it feels like after Spectre, the chronologically correct movie to watch would be a Sean Connery film.
Yeah, I guess a little bit, yeah.
Which is kind of weird, right? Like,
yeah, and they certainly did quite a bit of retconning with Spectre, where they suggested that all the films we'd seen up until that point were influenced in some way by Blofeld, even though he'd never been directly referenced. So they kind of went back around and they fixed this timeline to better suit the needs of Spectre, which they didn't really have to do.
No, and Christoph Waltz being Blofeld was like one of the worst kept secrets in the world too.
Oh yeah. So I would be very happy if they went with a new villain. I would be just fine if they kind of put a button on the Blofeld thing and kind of, I don't know, if anything, bring him back for a quick cameo so that, maybe he cackles at Bond towards the end of this new film or something, when in prison or something like that, So
did you want to touch on TIFF?
Yeah, because the lineup for the two, I guess the two biggest programs at TIFF just dropped a few days ago, And personally, I'm pretty fired up about it because I know I think I've got like 20 tickets reserved for TIFF this year. So, which is a lot of money, but it's going to be worth it because the gala presentations and then the special presentations have been announced. There's all kinds of cool stuff on it. There's the new Boston bombing film, Stronger, with Jake Gyllenhaal. There's a Paul Rudd drama film. Oddly enough, he's dipping his toe into the drama world with a movie called The Catcher Was a Spy. He plays a baseball catcher who ends up becoming a OSS spy during World War II.
Interesting premise. I like the sound of that. And I like Paul Rudd too. So
yeah, so that could be really cool. There's Downsizing, the new Alexander Payne film. We haven't seen anything from him since Nebraska from a few years ago. So I'm pretty excited for that.
Yeah, which wasn't a very big hit. Not as big as The Descendants.
But it was really good. Like it was probably one of my favorite movies of that year. Then there's Suburbicon, the new George Clooney directed film with Matt Damon. It's kind of a 1950s suburbia dark comedy. The trailer just dropped today, so that's worth checking out. Oh God, and there's still so many. There's a new film from Greta Gerwig. She's moving into the director's chair for the first time. We've got a new Darren Aronofsky film. There's the new one from Martin McDonagh, 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. And then Del Toro's back in the game with his new movie, The Shape of Water, that just had a trailer there. So,
what did you think of The Shape of Water?
From the trailer, I'm already over the moon. I'm like,
really? Don't you think that the monster in that movie is very much like Abe Sapien from Hellboy?
Oh, maybe, but I don't care at all. I'm like, I'm gonna be first. Like that is an opening night film for me for sure.
And it's Doug Jones in that.
Yeah, that partnership has always been great.
Yeah. It's just funny that you have a underwater monster who likes eating boiled eggs, and it's a very Abe Sapien thing.
Yeah,
and Michael Shannon's in it, so that's always a good thing.
Yeah, and the premise is really cool. It's got this kind of Cold War creature feature kind of thing, a bit of a, as he often likes to say, gothic romance. So
he's a very dark dude.
Yeah, but he does it so well, and I'm even if the movie kind of ends up in that category that a lot of his movies do, where it's more made for the fans, and for the critics than being a box office smash, I was
going to say, like, his films tend to be a little fetishistic. I don't even know if that's the right word to describe it, but it's definitely catered towards a certain type of fan.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, I mean, he's just one of those directors, it's harder to sell those kind of darker, Lovecraftian or
Tim Burtian.
Maybe not. Well, Tim Burton often goes too far with that, I find.
Right, but I mean, they have very distinct styles, and you can watch a film and know right away if it's Del Toro or Burton or an Anderson. He has a very distinct style. So did you love Valerian?
Valerian, yeah, because we've been talking about some upcoming stuff for most of this episode, but we got to get into some new releases that we've seen. So yeah, I guess we'll kick it off with Valerian in the City of a Thousand Planets. This is the new film from Luc Besson.
Overrated.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm definitely not here to defend it, because if you've seen The Fifth Element, which I think is probably the one that has the biggest cult following, I guess.
Yeah, that and Leon.
Yeah, Leon the Professional. If you've seen The Fifth Element, the world of this movie is going to feel very familiar. It's set in 500 years in the future at a time when, humans have spread throughout the galaxy. They've got this peaceful interaction with thousands of other species. Everyone's kind of like singing Kumbaya and, mutual exchange of resources and knowledge and all of that stuff. So this allows Luc Besson to kind of go further into the universe that I think he said that it is technically the same universe as the one in The Fifth Element. So these like massive cities that are just bristling with all kinds of multicolored lights and flying spaceships, and it's instantly recognizable that way. And, you can sit back and, I would definitely say watch this on the big screen if you're going to watch it at all, because you can kind of just bathe in all of this kind of cosmic acid trip visuals. But then that's where it begins and ends for me, because once you've kind of been bathing in this for a while, naturally you're going to start thinking about the story and the characters, and that's where the whole thing kind of falls apart.
Right. Okay.
Because the story is all about two soldiers or like special agents played by Dane DeHaan and Cara Delevingne. And they're kind of tasked with some sort of mission to save the universe, I guess, or save at least save the kind of the city of 1,000 planets, like this kind of capital city type of thing. There's a mysterious threat, and then there's some business about one of the races has kind of been wiped from existence, but then a few members of the species have survived, and there's a mystery or a cover-up. But the dialogue, it sounds like, and I'm not sure what language Luc Besson uses primarily when he writes. I have to assume it's French.
Yeah.
But I don't know if he wrote it first in French and then translated it into English, but there is something missing in translation here, because the words that have been given to Dane DeHaan and Cara Delevingne to kind of come out of their mouths, it sounds like Hallmark card platitudes. Like Dane DeHaan has to kind of like mope around and kind of say like, I'm in love with you, why won't you marry me?
He is kind of mopey.
The dialogue just accentuates everything about that, and just makes him feel like at once paper thin, but also really annoying. And Cara Delevingne is basically tasked with, using that kind of characteristic smirk and being like, I'm so much smarter than everybody. But
yeah, she has one look.
I'm still kind of interested to find out, like, if she decided to work with a director and with a script that were artistically elevated, would she be good? But she keeps choosing projects that just don't ask a lot of her. And
well, she's not an actress by trade anyway.
What I'm curious about is, like, if she did, like, I don't know, like an indie film with a director and like a really interesting dramatic script, like, would she be able to deliver the goods, or is this all she can do? Because the projects she's choosing don't really challenge her very much. So, if you've seen Cara Delevingne in Suicide Squad or in Paper Towns or like the few other things she's done, then you'll know what to expect here.
She's kind of transitioning into a movie star kind of career that just has not taken off and may not ever take off.
And if she keeps doing like these blockbuster things, she's not going to get very far. At least in terms of like critical appraisal. Like, I'm sure she'll do just fine with box office numbers.
Yeah, and I think people really underestimate how good dialogue has to be for a film to be good. So I think there are certain directors that write very good dialogue and certain ones that just can't write a lick of dialogue. Kind of like how George Lucas almost killed Star Wars because he can't write dialogue.
And, that's a good comparison to make here, because the interesting thing about the Valerian series, it started out as a comic book series that actually predated Star Wars. So it was a French comic book series that had a lot of the same elements that would later be repurposed by other directors and become the major franchises that we know and love. So it originated a lot of that kind of stuff, that space opera quality. But the weird thing is that it's taken this long for it to be adapted. So now it feels like it's actually the one that's lagging behind, and it's kind of catching up to those ones. And I think, I don't know, if it had been made by a direct, or even if it had been made by Luc Besson, but he had a screenplay that had been written by somebody who, speaks English as a first language, it sounds bad, but, I think a lot of what he was trying to go for got lost when it jumped from French to English. And you just can't relate to these characters. The third act is also a huge problem. It's like a giant exposition dump that drains all of the drama out. You're just watching these characters kind of explain the plot to each other for a good 15 minutes. And then it kind of rushes into this big action-heavy conclusion.
That's another thing. There are certain directors that are very exposition-heavy, like Christopher Nolan, who we'll get to later on. But they somehow make it work because there's certain other elements that they include. Like, they're not explaining to you as if the audience is an idiot. They're kind of explaining certain details to you, and you sort of make the connection. I think we can both agree that when Luc Besson's name is attached to it, it's no longer a huge selling point.
Yeah. But I guess the last little thing to mention about it is he's actually not going to lose any money on this, even though it's performing pretty terribly at the box office. He's not going to lose money on it because he adopted this indie film financing technique where he went to Cannes and pre-sold distribution rights to the tune of, I think it was $80 or $90 million.
Oh, wow.
Pretty much making back his entire production budget before the movie came out.
That's smart.
Yeah. So like
he already knew how terrible it was.
So yeah, he was able to produce this gigantic $100 million movie. And not lose any money, because he's probably like, if it had been made the traditional way, like if a studio had put up the 100 mil or 150 mil or whatever they needed, and then they were just relying on box office to make it back, it would have probably bankrupted the company. Because I think it came in 5th place in its first weekend.
Speaking of big budgets, War for the Planet of the Apes.
Yes. So maybe, how about you kick us off? Because I know I ended up loving this a lot more than you did, and I think we're gonna butt heads on this one a bit.
Yeah. So like, well, it's not out of the ordinary that you kind of, I think, like things more than me, because I tend to be a lot more picky, I think, my personal opinion. But my main gripe with War for the Planet of the Apes is some of the plot structure, the pacing, and the character arcs. So I think the first thing that kind of rubbed me the wrong way was the opening titles, where they had the text running over, the front of the center of the screen, reminding you of what had happened in the previous 2 films. And then it jumps in right away to this like action sequence that really grips you. And then it turns into like a sort of like a meandering Lawrence of Arabia type journey, and then becomes like a Prison Break kind of film. And then at the end of the film, and up to that point, it's really well executed, and it really kept me in my seat. But the third act I had huge problems with, because it felt like it fell into the same trap as a lot of superhero films, where the movie just ends because it needs to. And there's a final fight scene where it involves like humans and apes, and then all of a sudden it just kind of like in The Return of the King, when you have the army of the undead just kind of like come in and wipe everyone out within like 20 seconds. That's what I kind of felt like with War for the Planet of the Apes, because throughout the entire movie they had kind of like built up this conflict between Caesar and Woody Harrelson as the villain. And I thought they dealt with Woody Harrelson's character quite well, but the final action sequence just really bugged me. There's certain characters that all of a sudden have a change in their character arc because it's convenient. And I honestly think that it'll be my second favorite film in the series. I still think that Dawn of the Planet of the Apes was a lot better. And I also had like issues with this is hindsight, but don't you think it would make a lot more sense if War for the Planet of the Apes was the name of the second movie and Dawn of the Planet of the Apes was the name of this movie?
Yeah, I mean, the
title is just kind of like, it kind of threw me for a loop there.
Yeah, I think, well, the titling for this has always been a little bit confusing, because we had Rise and then Dawn, so people were like, what's the difference? And, you could explain that away if you tried hard enough, but I think people's eyes would gloss over. So yeah, the titling here is, I think that's kind of a known issue.
Yeah, it's about 20 minutes too long too, that movie. This movie kind of drags.
I'm sort of with you on that. I think I would have been happier if it was a bit snappier.
Yeah.
But I have to disagree on the way it ends, because, it's not my favorite ending. I can't go 100% to bat for it, but I will say that there's some poetic justice in the way that the avalanche, which we see wiping out this kind of second force of humans, the avalanche has been set off by the explosion of the arms cache that Woody Harrelson's character had been amassing in this facility. So it's because of the conflict between the two human armies that the avalanche comes in and then kind of finishes them off for good.
But don't you think that undercuts the effect of the simian flu? I thought...
Yes, I will say that, like, if I had been, I don't know, and... there's only so much value in kind of like rewriting a script.
Right.
You don't want to go too far, but I think a better ending would have been, allow the simian flu to kind of slowly take over Woody Harrelson's troops, and keep the ending with Woody Harrelson as is, because you're totally right. It was a great way to kind of to deliver on what the film had been talking about up to that point, but then, I don't know, like maybe have the apes take advantage of this other human army coming in, use that as their chance to escape and like move on to the promised land, and then maybe just have a quick scene where you kind of show that the simian flu is taking over the other force of humans too, like not being totally wiped out, but they're being sidelined.
And it's It's a bit of a slow burn film, a lot more of a slow burn film than I had expected because, based on the title and the trailers, you think there's like this big giant action movie, which it really isn't, and that's fine. But there are 4 things about characters. So the first is obviously Andy Serkis is unbelievable. I think we can all agree that he is not just like the best motion capture actor, but just like one of the best actors, period. And I wish he would get more recognition. Like, what's up with you, Academy? Like, come on, let's go.
Maybe, again, any issue with the Academy can always be addressed by looking at the demographics. Like, they bring in 2,000 or 1,000 new voters into the Academy every year, and they try to intentionally skew younger with those new members because they know that they have a problem with the overall voting block being predominantly male, white,
really old,
over the age of 55, and it's that major block of voters that always keeps genre movies from doing well. And certainly in this case, even the Academy, the way it currently is, it would be a surprise if they decided to give Serkis a nomination for Best Actor for this.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that he's done all this great work. Not only is he, and anyone who's seen this will agree, I think, not only is he portraying a character and giving that character like a personality and flaws and an emotional core, but he's also doing a completely different species.
Yes.
He's got to build in everything that's recognizable about chimpanzee behavior into a character who has all of the human qualities as well. And I mean that, nobody else is working like that in the business right now.
No.
And
so that kind of brings me to my second point, and that's Steve Zahn as the comic relief in this movie.
Oh yeah, Bad Ape.
Yeah, Bad Ape. And he, I think, kind of saved this film because at times it does feel a little too melodramatic. And I like the fact that when they bring Steve Zahn in midway through the movie, he provides a lot of comic relief. I think it's a really nice way to break up the film because it felt at times a little too monotonous and a little too depressing and a little too slow.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. Like the Bad Ape was, but they don't overdo it. It's not like it's not like he becomes perfect. like the clown of the movie or anything. He's just in there, kind of sprinkled in, and the laughs that he gets are pretty genuine.
Yes. The other 2 things, and they're kind of related, are my biggest issue with characterization in this film, and that's Preacher, who is one of the human soldiers under Woody Harrelson's command, and Donkey, who is a gorilla who is again on Woody Harrelson's army. So the big thing with Preacher is that he is the first, I think he's the first human character to have a line of dialogue in this film.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, and so he appears, I think, throughout the movie, even more so than Woody Harrelson, who doesn't really appear until like midway through, until you really get to know him. They kind of talk about him in the background. So Preacher kind of has this arc where you kind of think that he sympathizes with the apes, but then he reverts back to his like hoo-ha soldier type mentality, and in the final climax you kind of expect him to have this change of heart or this character arc that kind of completes itself, but it never comes.
Yeah, I can see that.
And the same with Donkey, the ape, but in another sense is that Donkey's story is that he joins the human side in this fight because he feels like the humans are going to be the winners of the war, and he doesn't want to basically become extinct like he thinks the other apes will. So all this time he's on Woody Harrelson's side, and there's this extended bit of the movie where he is a slave driver pretty much, and he beats Caesar in captivity, and he's totally on the human side. But then when the action really starts, he all of a sudden turns a corner and becomes like Team Ape again, which I didn't really get because he's been watching his fellow apes get tortured for the entire movie, but all of a sudden, just when Caesar needs saving, he turns into a white knight, like a Deus Ex Machina, where he just kind of comes out of nowhere and saves the day. And I always thought that arc could have been handled a little differently, a little better, and it never seemed like his motivations were entirely clear. I don't know if you agree with that.
I definitely agree with the Preacher analysis a bit more, because thinking back on it, yeah, they could have done something better in the third act to kind of close that thing off. But with Donkey, I think maybe at least the way I read it was that Caesar spends a lot of his interactions with Donkey trying to convince him that he's misguided, or that the humans will just renege on their bargain with him and kill him when he's no longer useful. None of Caesar's arguments really get through to Donkey, and he keeps mistreating his fellow apes up and up and up until that kind of crucial scene in the climax. And I mean, for me, I just sort of read it as he kind of reached a critical mass where he was okay with the mistreatment of the apes up until a certain point, but finally it hit home for him, and he was like, I can't take any more of this. But yeah, there needed, I think, to really deliver on that, we needed to see some piece of information to kind of signal what the trigger was,
Yeah, the trigger moment, the pivotal moment, I think that was really missing from Donkey's arc.
It could be as simple as like a flashback, or it could be something to kind of show us where his head's at,
or like some sort of interaction between him and Woody Harrelson's character alone, where something just clicks in his head and he says, you know what, Woody Harrelson does not have my best interests in mind, does not like the apes at all, and this is why I feel bad for Caesar, and I want to basically, make up for my sins as an ape kind of deal, So like those were sort of the things that made me feel the movie, didn't quite live up to expectations, especially with the early buzz saying how like War for the Planet of the Apes was one of like the best blockbusters we've had in a while. And granted, it's very good, it's well executed, but I definitely don't think it's one of the best over the, past 5 years. It's not even the best movie this year, I would say.
No, it's not the best movie this year, but for me, I was willing to overlook some of the certain specific character moments for the sake of, you look at other movies of that kind, which rely so heavily on CGI to represent the main characters. And for me, the fact that the movie is able to be that kind of movie, to be that kind of big summer tentpole, but still be so emotional, and to conclude the trilogy in a way that ties things off and is willing to have characters be sacrificed while still, leaving some subtle openings for spin-off movies or subsequent movies without a direct kind of like, give us a sequel kind of scene. It vaulted over a lot of possible pitfalls in a movie of its kind. And
yes.
I think maybe
so. That's true.
That's the origin of some of the people saying that it's such a significant blockbuster.
Well, because the budget was crazy, right? And you kind of assumed that the budget would go into explosions and like huge set pieces, but not really. Like there's only one or two big sequences.
Yeah, it's really just that big climax battle scene between the two human armies that...
and the first part where they find like the ape lair. Also, two more things too. I was kind of surprised that War for the Planet of the Apes didn't really have any callbacks to the previous two films other than the text intro. And I kind of wish they did, because it would have tied in nicely, and it would have like...
You wanted some James Franco action?
No, I wanted some Jason Clarke action.
Oh.
And like, or reference the stuff and Tim Roth too, reference the stuff that had happened before instead of having the text, which I thought was really distracting, and it was really poorly written. I don't know if you felt that way.
No, I found the text pretty corny as well.
It was really corny.
I feel like the filmmaker should have assumed that people kind of knew where we were at,
Or at least don't use text to explain the backstory, I'd almost prefer if they'd use it through exposition or even flashbacks, Because I honestly feel like visually it would have been far more effective. My other gripe is that it kind of has a... Do you remember in The Hobbit where, like, I think it was like goblins or orcs or something were chasing Radagast the Brown?
Yeah.
They kind of go in like circles in the same thing. And I'm watching the movie. I'm like, the apes are like trailing this human convoy just like 50 feet behind. How does no one not notice that they're being
that
followed?
happened a few times. I remember thinking to myself when I saw it, I'm like, wait a second, they're not being stealthy at all.
No, and like, the way they sneak in and out of like Woody Harrelson's compound is just like, it's so ridiculously easy. I'm just like, you have an army of like 100 soldiers and no one realizes gorillas just like walking in and out of the compound.
Exactly. Or there's a few scenes where they're kind of crossing like the no man's land and there's searchlights going, and like you'd think that there would be somebody on the wall that would kind of be like, oh wait, that looks like an ape over there. Like nobody does.
I know, right? Like it's not that hard to tell the difference between a soldier and an ape, you know? Like, but that's just like a funny moment for me.
That's just, yeah, it is a kind of more of, it's kind of a trivial thing. Maybe you chalk it up to the simian flu kind of.
Yeah, making everyone kind of stupid, yeah.
But do you want to close things out with Dunkirk? Because I've seen it. I saw it on opening weekend. I know you're planning to see it soon.
Yeah, so Dunkirk is interesting. Like, I love the fact that it was filmed on IMAX, and it's kind of given IMAX like a new platform to advertise its technology, which I think if you're a big fan of movies, beats anything that's ever come out, including like 4D, 3D, or like the theater that like sprays water at you when they like, you know, all that kind of stuff, or like blows wind if there's like a mountain on the screen, all that kind of like texture-y stuff. I did want to ask you though, from like having seen Dunkirk, where would you rank this film among all of Nolan's works?
Wow. It's pretty high up there, I would say. I don't know whether it's his best film. I think I would need to see it another couple of times to really say for sure, but I would say it's in his top 3 because he's doing things here that, you know, he's not burdened by, well, maybe burdened is the wrong word, but he's not trying to fit Dunkirk into let's say a comic book universe like he did with Batman, or a sort of supernatural kind of thing like he did with The Prestige, or even like
there's certain tropes he definitely uses though, right? So like non-linear story structure, you know, the use of sound, dividing the movie up into separate pieces and kind of tying it all together at the very end, or not even doing that, just letting the audience do that and figuring out things for themselves.
And it took me a while. I would say it took me about, it's not a long movie. It's very short by his standards. It's only an hour 47.
Yeah, it's short by anybody's standards these days.
And I would say it took me about 30 minutes to really clue into the fact that he was moving at different time scales. By default, when we watch movies, we assume that on either side of a cut, if the two scenes are happening in different locations, we kind of assume that they're happening at the same time unless we're told differently. So the way he kind of stitches things together, at first you're like, okay, these are all daytime sequences, so they could conceivably all be happening at the same time. But then he suddenly cuts to a nighttime shot. And the first time it happened, I was like, wait, is that a continuity error in a Christopher Nolan film? Like, that doesn't seem right. Yeah. He's too good for that. And then another like maybe 10 minutes went by, and then he does something that reveals, you know, he has a character pop up who you're like, oh, I get it now. And then what he's doing becomes even more obvious, and you're like, oh wow, okay. And then from that point you're kind of swept up in decoding where you are at any given moment. And for me, it did so much to kind of to present a totally different way of thinking about a battle like Dunkirk, or a military event like Dunkirk, and how, depending on where you are in it, what your perception of time is. So, I mean, yeah, that's one of the reasons why it immediately jumps up into the top 3 Nolan films for me.
The other thing about Nolan is his use of sound, and I think this has become more of a theme just recently, with his recent films. So we know that the ticking clock is a like recurring motif in Dunkirk.
But before we go too far, here's a taste of what that sounds like from the trailer.
The call went out. We have to go to Dunkirk. Ready on the stern line.
What are you doing? You know where we're going.
Into war, George.
I'll be useful, sir.
One of ours.
My one gripe with Nolan films is that the dialogue in his scenes tend to be too quiet. Like, I don't know if this is true for this film, but sometimes the sound effects and the dialogue are at 2 completely different levels. And I read somewhere that he meant to make the dialogue at a lower volume level so that you can't hear what they say clearly, because when people talk to each other in real life, they don't necessarily hear every single word Like they don't enunciate every single word, and he's trying to replicate that sort of realism. I don't know if this is present in that film or if you noticed anything like that. I think I noticed it for sure in The Dark Knight.
Yeah, it was a thing in The Dark Knight, and I think, and then of course part of that is that whole meme about nobody understanding Tom Hardy's voice as Bane. But that's kind of like a separate thing. That then in Interstellar, it was the sound effects of the rockets and the space travel and the Hans Zimmer score overcoming the dialogue. Here, there wasn't a point in this where I had a hard time understanding what people were saying. You know, thinking back to Interstellar and The Dark Knight Rises, there were definitely points when I saw those movies for the first time where I was losing lines, but this time in Dunkirk, I didn't lose any lines, but it is mixed in a similar way. So I've seen people say like they lost out on a bunch of lines and that they would have to rewatch it like 2 or 3 times before they would totally figure out what everyone is saying. But I think in Dunkirk, it's almost like he embraces that in a more obvious way than he did in Interstellar and in The Dark Knight Rises, because he simply just doesn't have that much dialogue for the sound effects to compete with. You know, the main character, if you can call him that, he doesn't speak for like the first, I would say like 40 minutes of the movie almost. And the same thing with the other characters. There's just a lot of people like just standing and staring and kind of drinking everything in, but you don't miss it.
Just going back to Nolan and his top films, what are your top 3 Nolan films?
It's still really hard because I like all of them so much.
It is pretty hard, eh? Well, let's put it this way. What are his top 3 underrated films?
Oh, no, because I don't like the word underrated, but
well, underappreciated? Because I can tell you right away, I think it's Insomnia, The Prestige, Inception, or Interstellar, one of those two. Because I feel like Inception has been forgotten a little bit, but definitely those 3 films I feel like are his most underappreciated films, especially in terms of what they've accomplished and the amount of storytelling that comes through. I feel like especially for The Prestige and Insomnia, I feel they're really more callbacks to Memento than any of his other films, and I do think structurally and pace-wise they're some of his best works.
Well, I would agree with you on that. I think if I were forced, like gun to my head, I would probably say that...
There is a gun to your head, Rob.
You're the Joker in this environment.
Yes.
Okay, so gun to my head, I would say The Dark Knight is still his best film for me. Followed by Dunkirk at number 2, and then I would say The Prestige and Interstellar are competing for number 3. They're like tied for number 3 for me. But that's just like right now. Like that's only watching Dunkirk once, so
right.
Things could totally change. But
did you like Insomnia?
I did like Insomnia, but there's a lot of stuff going on there that it's definitely not his worst film. I can't call it that.
No, his worst film by far is Dark Knight Rises, I think.
Yeah, I suppose.
Worst being like relative.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
like it's still fine. I think it's still an okay film.
Yeah, but it'd probably be in like 9th or 10th place for me. I guess we can reconvene when you get a chance to see Dunkirk in the next episode. We can kind of go over it in a little bit more detail.
Frontrunner Best Picture nominee?
Yeah, I would be surprised if it, I think the Best Picture category is back down to 5 this year. I think that's
a good thing, and it could be a bad thing because the Academy is so like unreliable.
Yeah, it's always hard to kind of pin them down on this kind of stuff, and who knows, they may even change it in the months leading up to it again.
And he's never won Best Picture, has he?
Yeah, and like if there was ever a movie that he could win an Oscar for,
it's a historical film.
Yeah, it's going to be a historical film because the Academy still loves World War II stuff almost disproportionately. I think he's proving to them in this that he's not just an auteur of the blockbuster genre, that he can make stuff that, is artistically different, and he can...
And I'd almost argue that he is good at blockbusters because he's such a fantastic storyteller. I think people who can't tell stories like Zack Snyder or Michael Bay make really poor blockbuster films.
So in the next episode, we'll definitely get into a little bit more with Dunkirk once you've had a chance to see that. I'm going to hopefully be talking about Atomic Blonde because I'm going to be seeing that this weekend. And August is shaping up to have some interesting stuff too. We can maybe do an August preview next episode as well.
We've gone long enough.
This is already a mega-size episode. So head on over to kinetoscope.ca if you're not tired of hearing us blather on about stuff. We've got new reviews of War for the Planet of the Apes and Spider-Man Homecoming, and we'll have a review of Dunkirk and of Atomic Blonde in the near future. But from Toronto, my name is Robert Snow.
And from Vancouver, I'm Jason Chen. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.